Hello, friends. In this episode, I'm continuing my reading of Henry Stephen Salt's collection of essays titled A Plea for Vegetarianism. In this episode, I'll read Chapter 3, Good Taste in Diet. The word aesthetic comes up in the previous chapters of Salt's book, but as this chapter has it as its main focus, I looked the meaning up again, and then specifically what the word meant in the UK in the 1800s. The Merriam-Webster's definition is dealing with the beautiful, also artistic. I found this information on the V&A Museum's website. The aesthetic movement in Britain, 1860 to 1900, aimed to escape the ugliness and materialism of the industrial age by focusing instead on producing art that was beautiful rather than having a deeper meaning, art for art's sake. The artists and designers of this cult of beauty crafted some of the most sophisticated and sensuously beautiful artworks of the Western tradition, and in the process remade the domestic world of the British middle classes. So not unlike the vegetarians and vegans of today, hoping more well-known people will be a proponent or influencer for vegetarianism, Henry Salt was looking at the aesthetic movement and saying, hey, how can you limit your focus of beauty on a chair or a plate and ignore what's on the plate? Another name for this chapter might be You Are What You Eat. A quote by William Morris regarding aestheticism in the V&A article is, if you want a golden rule that will fit everybody, this is it. Have nothing in your houses that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful. William Morris, 1880. Personally, I've never thought of not eating meat for the beauty of it. However, I can certainly see that eating meat would be the opposite. We avoid considering it as ugly because of its packaging and our distance from the slaughterhouses. Next time you open that package, ask yourself, no, not you, Joe Rogan, is it beautiful? Now here's the next chapter in A Plea for Vegetarianism by Henry Stephen Salt. Chapter 3, Good Taste in Diet. It is a remarkable and lamentable fact that the movement in favor of food reform finds but few supporters among the classes known as aesthetic and artistic, among those, in short, who pride themselves on their so-called good taste, and who might therefore have been especially looked to for favor and sympathy. For setting aside for the present all considerations of morality and gentleness, I maintain that there are just as glaring faults of bad taste visible in our system of diet as in our dress or furniture or general household arrangements, all of which have been very severely and very properly criticized by the aesthetic school. How foolish and inconsistent it is to be vastly fastidious about the manner in which one's food is served up, and at the same time to be totally indifferent as regards the quality from an aesthetic view of the food itself. The highest art may be apparent in the decoration and arrangement of the table, but if the food be gross in taste and smell, the result can hardly be gratifying to the truly aesthetic mind. But it may be asked, is it a fact that flesh food is gross in taste and smell? One of the commonest objections of flesh eaters to the reformed diet is that flesh meat is nice, and the guests at an aesthetic dinner table have presumably no sort of suspicion that they are eating anything which is not high art. Of course, dietetic taste, like all other tastes, is relative and subjective. There's no absolute criterion of good taste. But each man must decide for himself what he considers nice. It is therefore impossible to prove the superiority of the reformed diet or to convince flesh eaters that their taste is not immaculate. We can only trust to the results of experience and the good taste which is gradually brought about by culture and education. All vegetarians will emphatically deny that flesh food is nice and will assert that only a depraved and uncultivated taste can relish it. And if our aesthetic friends will give the matter a little serious consideration, they will very soon find themselves arriving at the same conclusion. So far I have used the word aestheticism as merely equivalent to the actual perception by the senses, a meaning to which its modern votaries seem to wish to restrict it. But in real truth it cannot be thus limited, at any rate in dietetic questions, for we cannot wholly exclude the consideration of the origin of our food. However gratifying our flesh meat may be to our immediate taste, a very gross and uncultured taste, as I have attempted to show, we cannot altogether forget its extremely unpleasant antecedents. However artistic the arrangement of the dinner table, however immaculate the tablecloth and faultless the dinner service, the disagreeable thought must surely sometimes occur to the artistic mind that the beef was once an ox, the mutton was once a sheep, the veal was once a calf, and the pork was once a pig. We may scrupulously make clean the outside of the cup and platter, but the recollection of the state of their interior will nevertheless cause some disquietude to our aesthetic repose. In fact, though we may well be thankful for any reaction against the gross materialism and vulgarity of modern society, it may be doubted whether any class can be truly aesthetic which does not recognize in its creed the supreme importance of gentleness and humanity. The man who keenly sympathizes with the suffering of dumb animals has a more truly aesthetic mind than many of our modern connoisseurs of high art who are inexpressibly pained by the sight of an ugly house or an inartistic piece of furniture, while they view with entire equanimity a system of diet which necessitates the very ugly trade of the butcher. It would be curious to know if there were any aesthetic persons present at the Alexander Palace among those who enjoyed the novelty of a kid dinner given by the British Goat Society about a year ago, 1880. At this dinner, to quote the account then given in the Daily News, the honorary secretary confessed to having slaughtered two of his own goats' kids amid the tears of his children to satisfy the appetites of the guests, and the statement was heard without eliciting any visible sign of remorse from the company. We are inclined to think that the aesthetic taste of those who could hear this statement without showing very visible signs of dissatisfaction must have been of a somewhat questionable character. But it is needless to refer to individual instances of bad taste when all the country is filled with the pollution of wholesale slaughter. Dwellers in London of superior sensibility frequently express their disgust at the unsightly streets and buildings where everywhere meet their view, and their pity for the gross tastes and habits of their fellow townsmen. Yet they raise no protest against the foreign cattle market of Deptford, from which the wants of Londoners are largely supplied, that the deeds which are daily enacted there are such as can hardly commend themselves to an aesthetic mind. At Deptford, as we learn from a lately published account, there weekly arrive some 3,000 bullocks, 20,000 sheep, and 1,000 calves. When they are landed at the entrance, the creatures, to do them justice, are not often ill conducted. Stupefied by the voyage, they are generally quiet enough, but sometimes the truth breaks in upon them, and they make a desperate effort for freedom. It is easy to guess what frightens them, for there is a strange scent in the air. Such are the circumstances under which the animals enter these slaughterhouses, all of them, be it remembered, naturally harmless and gentle. They are finally conducted to the long range of narrow stalls at the rear of the slaughterhouses. The scene here busy enough, and the celerity with which the work is done sufficiently remarkable. At the one end the fine great beasts go in, at the other emerge great sides of beef, hoofs, hides, and horns. There is much less uproar over the sheep, which are killed and dressed with great celerity. Pitiable indeed must be the mental and moral condition of those who can read such an account as this without loathing and disgust, and if the mere mention of it is well nigh intolerable, what is to be said of the system which necessitates the continual enactment of such scenes? Can any thoughtful man, in the face of such horrors, deliberately choose to be a flesh-eater? Must he not rather turn with relief to a vegetarian diet, with which alone can exist that widely sympathetic intellectual gentleness which recognizes the rights, not of man only, but of all the animal creation? To repeat the oft-quoted but seldom appreciated lines of Coleridge, "He prayeth best that loveth best all things both great and small, for the dear God who loveth us, he made and loveth all." This brings me to the subject of higher aestheticism, the only true worship of the beautiful, that which does not regard only the perceptions of the senses, but admits the consideration of the moral and the humane. Such a doctrine finds its fullest development in the works of Mr. Ruskin, a teacher whom we food reformers, in common with all who strive after a purer life, must revere above all living writers. The superiority of his teaching to that of the aesthetic school in general is due to the fact that he has not thought it necessary to divorce morality from art, but has shown that the consideration of morality is inseparable from true art, as also from true political economy, and indeed from any true science whatever. But alas, non omnia possums omnis, and it must be confessed that on the subject of humanity, Mr. Ruskin's teaching is not quite self consistent, while his utterances on the subject of vegetarianism show that he has never really given it his serious attention, though in the last number of Ford's Clavigera he seems inclined to reconsider the question. Of all the great writers, Mr. Ruskin is the one from whom the advocates of food reform might most reasonably expect at least a word of sympathy and assistance. He is the one who is least able, if he wishes to be self consistent, to disregard the aspirations of vegetarianism. Without perfect sympathy with the animals around them, no gentleman's education, no Christian education, could be of any possible use. So he said in 1877, and I am not aware that he has ever explained how perfect sympathy with the animals around us can be coexistent with a system of breeding and slaughtering them for food. Again, Rule 5 of Mr. Ruskin's Society of St. George runs as follows: I will not kill nor hurt any living creature needlessly, nor destroy any beautiful thing, but will strive to save and comfort all gentle life, and guard and perfect all natural beauty upon the earth. These are noble words, and they express the very essence and spirit of the vegetarian movement. Indeed, it is difficult to see how they can be uttered consistently and conscientiously by any but vegetarians. The only loophole of escape for the flesh eater seems to lie in the word needlessly, and of course, the impossibility of vegetarianism, once proved, would be a real justification of flesh eating. It is evident, however, from the main number of Ford's Clavigera that Mr. Ruskin is fully aware of the practicability, if not the desirability, of the reformed diet, for he speaks approvingly of Mrs. Nisbet's very valuable letter on vegetarianism to the Dunfermline Journal. It is therefore incumbent on the members of the St. George's Society to obey the rules of their order by ceasing to uphold the needless and therefore cruel institution of the slaughterhouse, and by adopting that diet which alone is in harmony with the instincts of morality and good taste. That concludes Chapter 3 of Henry Salt's A Plea for Vegetarianism. I will continue to Chapter 4 next episode. If you'd like to learn more about the rationale for vegetarianism from a modern hero, I recommend Earthling Ed's book, How to Argue with a Meat Eater, even if, or especially if, you yourself are the meat eater. If you need a repertoire of meat-free food, a quick Google search for any dish you love will find a tasty vegan equivalent. In my journey, I tried to learn a new vegan recipe a week, and before I knew it, I had no more worries that I could keep myself and loved ones well fed without harming other beings. If you are still on the fence, I honor your journey, and even if you start with 1 or more days a week without meat, you will have a profound effect on the earth and your fellow beings. Thank you for joining me for the Peace is Here podcast. Until next time, sit with yourself in silence every day. That's self with a capital S. We are all scholars of peace. Peace and love to you all. Podcast music is Dalai Lama Riding a Bike by Javier Peque Rodriguez. A link to his music on Spotify and Bandcamp is in the show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, it really helps me if you subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm Avis Kalfsbeck, and I write the Pedro the Water Dog Saves the Planet book series, which are a series of environmental adventure novellas. Books 1 through 5 are available at all your favorite online bookstores or at aviskalfsbeck.com. Book 6, Manu Mutante, is coming out soon. Go to aviskalfsbeck.com to be notified when new books come out. You love peace. I love peace. We love peace. Support messages of peace and the planet by joining my Patreon for as little as a cup of coffee per month at patreon.com. Just search Avis Speak or Pedro the Water Dog to find me. Thank you again. Listen for the peace.